Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Third Rail, a podcast that brings you three New Yorkers from three generations talking about U.S. culture and politics. I am Ben Appel, and I'm here with Daniel Idfresne and Maud Maron. Um, I'm the author of Cis White Gay, The Making of a Gender Heretic. Maud Maron is a writer and former litigator. Is that right? And you
Indeed.
are running for Manhattan DA. And Daniel Friends is a journalism student entering his last year at Syracuse University. He's a writer and a political commentator as well. Um, that was my ad lib of our introductions. We got a lot of feedback from the first episode. We really enjoyed it. It was a reminder of how our first episode, for those who didn't listen, was about the Russiagate or the Trump, Russia collusion scandal, and it's a extremely polarizing topic. We posted some videos. I muted the responses on my X. I'm not going to lie, because it was just people going back and forth and arguing, using kind of, and this is such a good example. It's just using different news sources to prove their points, where all of these news sources have so many different angles and different, things to say, and completely polar opposite facts.
Yeah.
So it's so hard to trust or listen or know anything. So I do appreciate the comments on mine, but when it got to the point where it was folks saying he did collude, no, he didn't collude, and this is why he didn't, I was like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah.
So that
Two
was great.
separate echo chambers with two separate sets of facts makes it hard to have one good conversation.
Right, right. Um, Absolutely. So, but what we talked about after that our first episode was that, what a lot of people who were listening will know who some of us are or who each of us are, but there are many people who will not. So we thought, well, let's do, a more, candid intro episode where we can each tell a little bit more about ourselves and how what the things that kind of informed our political viewpoints, our current political viewpoints, and just our life perspectives in general. So, you guys think that's a good idea, right?
Yeah, I think
Indeed.
it's a fantastic
It's a
idea.
very good
Okay.
plan. Um, and I will, since I'm the oldest, since I'm representing Generation X here, I'm going to go first. We don't have to go in age order, but I was thinking about this a lot, and there are two things that you know, for folks who don't know me, you know who I am. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a mom of four kids. I worked as a public defender at the Legal Aid Society, in the criminal defense division, representing poor people accused of crime. That's what public defenders do. And then had sort of a cancellation story that I can talk about a little bit, but then spent a lot of years doing education advocacy in New York City, being on my school board, fighting back against some of the leftist extremism that was part of what got me canceled in my kids' schools, and then fighting to open schools during COVID and getting very politically active. And I've run for office before, and now I'm running as a Republican. But when I was thinking about like how can I introduce myself, and sometimes I do this where I'm like on a news show, and they ask me like, how did you go from being a Democrat to a Republican, or how did you get here, or why are you running for office? And it's really hard sometimes to condense it all down like in a really short version. But there are sort of two conversions in my life that have been really significant. One was when I converted to Judaism as a young girl, and the other is when I became a Republican last year after 33 years of being a Democrat. Um, and for me, I have thought about both things a lot, in part because right now we live in this city and culture where anti-Semitism is, rearing its ugly head in a very extreme way. And I'm not much of a practicing Jew. I haven't really been in a synagogue, except here and there for friends, kids, bat mitzvahs, or things like that, much in the last few years, since my own bat mitzvah. But I have, it did inform when you grow up going to Sunday school, to a house of worship that has a moral clarity. It's something I feel really guilty about as a mom, that I didn't really give my kids as strongly as I think you should. But when you grow up with a certain moral clarity, it's something you can fall back on. in time, in terms of, and I know Ben, you might, because I know your story and other people don't, you might have a different perspective, but that, you know, and being raised Jewish is because my biological father walked out on my mom when I was very young, and then my mom remarried, and the man she remarried is Jewish, and he's my dad, my real dad, in my way of thinking about it, even though we're not biologically related. He adopted me, he's raised me, and he is my dad. And I'm so keenly aware as part of the national conversation when people talk about fatherless children and how hard it is to be fatherless and how unbelievably lucky I am, that I had and have a father in my life who's such an amazing dad. And then my mom and dad had three more kids together, and so we grew up, and it wasn't a family where it was like step parent or half sibling, like we were just one family, and I feel very grateful for that as well. So, that has had and continues to have a big impact on who I am. And it's not something I talk about very much. And in fact, sometimes when I'm in like political spaces where people are asking questions about anti-Semitism and friends that know that I'm Jewish will be like, Maud, you have to tell people you're Jewish. I'm like, I don't like walk around wearing it on my, like a shirt. But it does inform who I am in a very like real and big way. And then becoming a Republican, which was it doesn't when you convert to Judaism, there's a mikvah, there's a bath, and there's a very form. And I was very, very young when I did it, but there's a whole process. Becoming a Republican is a little less dramatic. You just go online and change your voter registration. So, and I did that in a two-part step. I left the Democratic Party when we were talking about the Russia hoax stuff last week. We mentioned Matt Taibbi a lot.
Mhm.
And it was actually after I saw Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger testifying at a House committee hearing about the Twitter files and the information about censorship on social media platforms that was coming out that I was like, okay, I'm done with the Democrats for now. Like, I can't handle this because all of the Democratic committeemen were bashing them and they're both such reasonable and kind of like formerly lefty or of the left journalists
Mhm.
talking about extreme government censorship, and they were bringing receipts and they were being reasonable, and it just became such a like a tribal partisan bashing and kind of funny at some points too. I don't know if you guys remember that hearing, but one of the Democratic congresswomen said to Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi and said something like, and there's another one like Bari Weiss, and you three are in a trio or a trip, a threesome, she said. There's a threesome, and they could tell they were like trying not to laugh. Um, so it was funny, but it was also like, oh my God, this is where the Democratic Party has gotten to, like the party of censorship. And so I became an independent, and I hung out in Independentville for a little while until I decided to run for office again and registered as a Republican. So those are two things in my life, one from being very young and being raised Jewish, and the other is leaving the Democratic Party because the Ronald Reagan quote, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. That's been my experience of not being willing to go to the extreme radical left, which is where my
Mhm.
city is now, which is why we elected Zohran Mamdani as a Democratic nominee. And so if you know that about me, you know a lot about me.
Well, did you when in the past when you ran for office, you ran as a Democrat, correct? Not an
Yeah, I
independent.
ran in
Okay,
21 for city council and 22 for Congress as a Democrat.
got it. And so what was that experience like different from running as a Republican and in New York, I guess? Like
Oh, yeah.
it's probably
Well,
very different.
it's very different for lots of reasons. One, because Democrats in New York outnumber Republicans about 8-1 in Manhattan.
Hmm.
So, so it's tough. Um, but man, is it freeing, right? Because when I was running in 21, I ran in the end of 2019 and 2020. It was like the height of some like intersectional woke sort of BLM fervor in our city.
And had you
So,
already run into your own problems with that at the
oh
time?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I had
when did your drama start? Like what year?
I, you know what? I'm gonna stick this. I'm doing the show notes this week, you guys, or at least
Okay.
taking the first stab at them. I've been thinking about it because I know there are some pieces that Daniel's written when I met Daniel that he wrote that I want to add in so that people can take a look at them. Barry Weiss covered my sort of cancellation from my place of work, which was the Legal Aid Society, in both a like a podcast that I did with her and a written piece, and we'll link to those two. But it was really because I mean, I had the temerity to kind of stand up for meritocracy and excellent education in my own children's public schools. If you go back and listen, I haven't listened to it in years, but it's like if at the time it was so shocking because I hadn't really said anything that would make you MAGA or Donald Trump or right wing. I was literally a Bernie Sanders supporting legal aid society working like left wing progressive New York City public school mom who was saying things like, we should not get rid of the gifted and talented programs in our public school. It's not good for public school kids. And that was enough to be a white supremacist, racist, to be like absolutely chased out of my place of employment. And the Legal Aid Society is about as far left as you can get in New York City. At the time, it was actually pretty traumatic and awful and terrible. Now I can like laugh at it, shake my head about it. I don't, there's like, Abigail Schreier, who's written many good books now, but some people know her from the book Irreparable Damage, this book she wrote about rapid onset gender dysphoria, about the trans craze that was sweeping through young people. And then she's written a book called Bad Therapy. But when I spoke with her at some point, because she was very canceled for speaking up about trans stuff early on, and she said to me, and it has always stuck with me, that the biggest surprise that came out of this thing of being canceled was the community of the canceled, this amazing group of people that you got to know. And it's very, very true. There's a very broad network of awesome people, some of whom are people who've been canceled, but some of whom are just people who are looking to find a place where you could speak and say things that weren't far left approved. And I wouldn't recommend anyone to go through what I
Mhm.
went through. It was kind of awful. But I will say that the community of people, including the two of you,
Right.
are people that I would not have met otherwise.
We
And
wouldn't
it
have
is,
met.
no, absolutely not. And it is, something I'm grateful for. It's a huge, huge silver lining. I mean, I
Cool.
lost a lot of friends too, but it's like a very huge silver lining.
Cool. Well, we'll probably keep talking about it, but let's go to Daniel and we'll kind of move along and we'll just kind of keep chatting about it. But Daniel, there's so much,
Well,
and this
yeah.
is kind of what sparked this for me because I know Maud very well. Obviously, I know myself very
Mhm.
well. I do not know you so well. I
Right.
know a lot about you, but I'm so eager to learn more. So anyway, just prefacing that, who are you? What's going on?
Who
I'm
are
very
you,
much like I'm
Daniel?
very much like Maud. I don't really like talking about personal life or sort of my background when it comes to commentary because I am the youngest of us three New Yorkers in this podcast. I'm 21 years old, a senior at Syracuse University, and uh, for me, I'm in that position at my age where I want to be taken seriously for my commentary, and so being very data driven and very analytical is important, but it's also just as important to tell your story, especially to humanize what Maud said. A lot of the cancellations that we've been seeing, a lot of the conversions that we've been seeing. Uh, for example, there was a New York Times report today talking about the number of Democratic registrations going down across the country, and at the same time, the amount of Republican uh, Americans who are becoming Republicans, that is increasing. And to us, that may seem like numbers to consultants and to those who study this stuff for a living. It may seem like numbers, but no, there's actually a story behind it. Just like Maud and her time uh, after being canceled from Legal Aid Society?
Legal Aid. I
Um,
saw that article, Daniel.
Legal
I'm so
Aid.
glad you mentioned that because we're going to link to that in the show notes too, because those numbers were pretty eye-popping. In
So
states where
yeah,
you
yeah,
can
it's really
register
eye
Republican
popping.
or Democrat, which is not every state, it's like the swing in every state where you can register is away from the Democrats and towards the Republicans.
I believe that. Just like in the election too.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so again, like I said before, I'm 21 years old. I'm part of Gen Z. And a lot of the talk in the town with Gen Z is how particularly young men within Gen Z are starting to shift to right. And I think that I'm definitely part of that. What we see now with younger Gen Z Americans. Back when I was 17, I wrote "I'm 17 and I'm immunized from world politics" for Bari Weiss and the Free Press, actually, which Maud will link when she's doing the
I
show
sure
notes.
will.
And in that article, I think that article is the best expression of my background, my beliefs, where I came from, and why I believe the things I do today. But for those who are listening, I don't have the time to read it. Long story short, I was born in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, New York. I am the son of Haitian immigrants. And so much of my upbringing uh, has been in a religious context. My parents are very religious, and uh, they would do missionary work every 2 years in Haiti, and I would join them, and so I would see firsthand what missionary and volunteer work looks like. We would have Bible study during the weeks, and we would go to church every Sunday. And I feel like that's the first pillar. I don't think about it that much, but it really very much is the first pillar to the beliefs that I have, and also the reason why I see a lot of my Gen Z peers, and you see the depression rates and the addiction to um and the addiction to Adderall and other antidepressants. Adderall is not an antidepressant. I'm not sure. I'm not a medical student, but Adderall and other
Yeah.
antidepressants and
It's actually
whatnot.
an
And
amphetamine.
I believe amphetamine. Okay, the more you know. Uh, because of that religious background, I think my parents for giving me a worldview that is you can't you can't be depressed and you can't hate your own life when you know when you believe in God the way that my parents have espoused that Christian worldview to me. Every day I wake up grateful that I'm breathing, that it's a great day, and that I have the opportunity to do something better than the last day. And then politically, how that forms politically is that because I have that worldview, I naturally just rejected a lot of the oppressionomics, victimhood mentality that I saw, especially in high school, because that was during COVID and BLM and whatnot. I naturally uh, did not like that kind of worldview because it ran diametrically opposed to everything I was taught to believe in growing up. And
Hey Daniel,
so,
can I ask you a question about that?
yeah.
It's so interesting because I know Ben also, because I know a little bit about Ben's life. Religion has certainly been a factor in your life,
Mhm.
Ben, and we'll get to it in a minute, but I wasn't thinking that it would come up for all of us so much in a way, but um you clearly think, Daniel, that like your parents' religious belief and your religious upbringing has insulated you in some ways or protected you from the worst of what your generation is seeing in terms of drug abuse and victimhood mentality and stuff. But do you think that's true of your in your peer group? Like, do you see that kids who have had a good religious upbringing are more immune to that stuff and kids who haven't are? Or are you just saying that's in your own life? But or do you see it in your peer group too?
Well, I'll say that 100% in my own life. And I would say I see it in my friends and in my peer group as well. One of my best friends from I've met him towards the end of middle school. We both studied in Dream, which is like free SHSAT prepping for the specialized high schools. He is way more religious than I am, which
Hmm.
is really funny because of my religious upbringing.
Hmm.
He's more religious than I am, and he has an incredible worldview, incredibly nice, sees everything. Um, and I don't know, he gives me the best advice and heartwarming advice that I take into my own life and make sure I do well in my personal life, whether it's career, friend groups, or whatever. And I see I see that similar glow that I see in my friend with others who have been raised religious and actually go to church, even though
Hmm.
they're at school. And college is not typically seen first and foremost as like a religious place. But
Hmm.
with my mutuals, those I know who are religious and unapologetically so. I'm not saying they're unapologetically religious in the sense that if you ask them, they'll say yes, and I do go to church, but it's not they're not necessarily um how would I describe it? For lack of a better term, Bible thumping,
Yeah.
Hmm.
while
Right.
we're in class or whatever. But it is an important part of their life, and it seemed, at least to me, to be happier and to
Hmm.
smile more and to give people compliments as they're walking past, and that's diametrically opposed to a lot
Yeah.
of things that we see in Gen Z today, where at least politically you have so much of a
Yeah.
victim mentality, impressionomics, uh, whether if especially if you're not the evil white man,
Right.
um, keeping you down, and then also in our generation we have a problem with chronic online use, and um,
I think it's so interesting,
the
Daniel, that you use the term glow to describe your friends who have religion in their life in a meaningful way,
Hmm.
because it's like a strong, evocative image.
well, yeah, it, and they glow especially because the backdrop is a generation that's devoid of meaning, who have lost the concept of urgency and time when it comes to being productive, for example, because we're always on our phones, and we would opt to scroll instead of reading a book, for example, or taking on meaningful tasks.
Hmm.
Politically, as I said before, we've had a worldview shoved down our throats that if again you're not the quote unquote evil white man, you're oppressed, and if you are a white man, then you're just evil, point blank, period.
Hmm.
Um,
What
and
was your free press
I
article called? Sorry, what was your free
I'm
press article?
17 and I'm immunized from all politics.
Got it. Go ahead. Keep going. I was curious about that.
Daniel,
Yeah,
when I
so
met you, you were still in high school.
yeah, I was completing my senior year of high school.
Yep.
Yeah,
So that must have
it's
really
it's
taken off then, that article, right?
yes. It ended up becoming syndicated in the New York Post.
Okay.
And I had my first ever Fox News media hit the day after it published. And since then that piece pretty much created, or like gave my political commentary career uh, forward. It gave it a boost. It pushed it forward. And suddenly, instead of finding a way to break, that was my break in. Instead of finding a way
Mhm.
to break in, I finally was in that piece put me in a position to write more articles, pitch
Hmm.
myself to Fox, and do
Mhm.
media hits, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the first thing. And you in the piece, I talk about my parents, the values they've instilled in me through Christianity. Um, but the second pillar, and this is also family related. I'm the son of immigrants, right? So my parents, they both were born in Haiti. My dad spent 10 years, a decade in Paris, France, before coming over to the United States. And we we don't we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the difference in values between immigrant families and American families, especially when it comes to Black America, where my parents, who are from the Caribbean, valued education to the point where they wouldn't even allow me to play sports because, or they're very heavily against it because they thought that if I was playing sports, then that's taken away from my time studying, right? And they really cared about education, discipline, um, sharing with your brothers. I have two siblings,
Mhm.
sharing with them because at some point, as they say, we're not going to be here, and so you have to work together with your siblings. So big family values, and one of the
Daniel,
biggest things.
oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but let me tell you one thing that it's so funny when you say
Mhm,
your parents and sports and stuff. My husband's an immigrant. He's from Argentina, and but every now and then, I'm like, I think he's like the Tiger Mom, Amy Chua, who wrote this
Hmm.
book, Tiger Mom, and I'm like, he's an Argentine man of my generation, a Gen X man, but like.
mhm,
All our kids play sports. So like I'll give him that. Like he has not blocked any sports playing, or they do a lot of sports in it. He is so fiercely opposed to sleepovers. He like can't stand sleepovers. He's like, why do they just like sleep? This is ridiculous. The next day they're tired. They can't do their homework. Like they can't like it's just and it's like Amy Chua in that book, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom that she wrote like oh my God, sleepovers was like, she was like, no way, no how. Like, she wouldn't let her kids do theater. Like, why would you let kids act in some school play? It's a waste of time when they could be doing their violin or their piano or their whatever. And it's like, when you say your parents wouldn't let you do sports, I just hear my husband being like, not another sleepover. And I'm like, sleepovers are a normal part of like childhood and growing up, but he wants no part of it. And he is. I mean, we both think education is incredibly important, but there's something about the immigrant mentality of like, if you're a person who went to another country, to this country, to our great country, to like make a better life, like you want to make sure that your kids are well set up. And I can just see, Daniel, your parents being like, these are the rules and this. But I'll say on the kid front that I'm one of four. I'm the eldest of four kids. And my, parents also said that to us. Not neither my both my parents are Brooklyn born, not immigrants. But this thing of like, your siblings, this is your unit. Like other people on the outside, like don't fight with each other because there's enough to fight with of people outside in the world. Like you have each other. And I think that's something I definitely try to instill in my own kids.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and what you said about immigrant family values, I mean, that's perfect. And I couldn't agree with you more. Your husband sounds like my parents when I was a kid, and you would hate it. You would
Yeah.
hate the fact that you want to play soccer after school, and your parents will tell you no. You would hate
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah.
that you want to watch cartoons a little bit longer, but you're not allowed to turn on the TV during the weekdays,
Yeah.
right? Only the weekends. And
Yep.
but looking back now, I am very grateful that that was the sort of that was the instruction that I received growing up,
Hmm.
especially when you pair that with the missionary work that I've done with my parents in Haiti every 2 years,
Hmm.
right? So I would see how the other side, those who are more poor, poverty stricken, lived, and that is something that fueled a great sense of gratitude towards America and the drive to work hard and to achieve, uh, because that is something that uh, it's American. Being able
Yeah.
having these opportunities is an American thing. And so that's the
Hey, Daniel,
second
can I
pillar.
ask you a question that I don't know?
Yeah,
Did
sure.
you speak English with your parents growing up, or did you?
So I would speak English to my parents. My parents would speak Creole to me.
Hmm.
So I can understand Creole
Right.
easily. Um,
That's such an
and
immigrant
it's
kid thing. My that exact same dynamic goes on in my house with my husband speaking Spanish and then the kids answering in English.
yeah, and I mean, it helps with helps my parents because I'm speaking English to them, so they
Hmm.
need to understand me, and then I'm listening to
Hmm.
them in Creole, and that's pretty
Hmm.
much between that and like I know like French and Haitian
Hmm.
hymns for
Hmm.
church because that's what I grew up around.
Hmm.
That's how I sort of got. I wouldn't say I'm fluent in Creole, but
Hmm.
I do understand it, and I could speak
Hmm.
a little bit of it. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, and so
What language did you
that's
study in
pillars.
school? Did you?
I studied French because it was like the easiest.
Yeah.
I did pretty well in French one because it's similar to Creole in many ways, but
Yeah.
French two was a different beast because French is just unnecessarily hard or complicated.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say the last pillar. So we have religion, we have family, and slash immigrant values, and I would say the last key pillars. I can ramble on forever about my upbringing, but I would say the last major thing would be growing up in New York City. And it seems paradoxical, right?
Right.
Because New York is a deep blue area, like you said, Maud in Manhattan.
Right.
Democrats outnumber Republicans 8-1. But if you're growing up in New York, I'm from Brooklyn, and growing up in New York City as a middle slash working class family gives you a very real, it forces you to mature faster. It gives you a very real sense of what reality is, essentially. And so when I found myself in the virtue signaling circles and in high school in particular at Brooklyn Tech, with students who are no shade to them, like from Park Slope and Tribeca and whatnot, espousing these woke beliefs that I know or naturally am opposed to because I under I've I've I haven't been sheltered pretty
Hmm.
much growing up as a middle class kid in Brooklyn. Um, that is, I guess, the final pillar of why I believe what I believe today. And I guess within that pillar of New York City, there's like several sub pillars. So one sub pillar would be um, the fact that I went to charter school for elementary and middle school, right?
Mhm.
And there's charter schools. They primarily serve Black and Hispanic parents in underserved communities. I went to. I was the founding. I was part of the founding class of Leadership Prep Ocean Hill. It's now known as Uncommon South Brownsville
But Daniel,
Academy
your
or
parents are
school.
like the classic charter school parents, right? Like black
Mm-hmm.
parents, you say middle class, working class, religious, like parents who are and who are together, like families with two parents that are religious, that are, black and Hispanic families make up the a huge bulk of the parents who value education and are and a huge part people argue about the charter school successes, but I think it's not arguable that some portion of that success is because the children that are in those schools are the children of people who have sought out a better education for their kids and that home life. And then you have to actually, have to do the work and you have to, and the kids themselves have to do the work in the schools. But it is somewhat a self-selecting group, and it's people who say like, oh, let's get the best education we can get for our kids.
You hit the nail
Um,
on the head, yeah. And my mother was actively seeking out different education opportunities, and I for kindergarten and the first part of first grade, I was situated at the local public school, and my mom didn't like it, and so she sought out different education opportunities,
it's like the
options for
classic
me,
charter school
and
story.
yeah, exactly. And she ended up finding Leadership Prep Chanel, part of Uncommon Schools. And so I spent from first grade to eighth grade part of a charter school where, especially at that school, reading and writing were top of mind. They were most important, right? English classes were 2 hours long compared to
Mhm.
in public schools. The There were 45 minutes long. There are 45 minutes long in public schools. We had independent reading time, 1 hour every morning, and
Mhm.
you would have to write a book report on every single book that you finished reading. And the students who read the most books, they got a trip to Six Flags at the end of the year. Um,
Love
and
that.
for history class was a lot of essays. You would write essays
Did
every
you make
single
it to
week.
Six Flags, Daniel?
Yes, I actually did. I actually did go to Six Flags for a
That
trip.
surprises me not at all.
Actually, very funny enough, I read uh growing up, I read a lot of dystopian books. It was like my favorite, like dystopian sci-fi books, which is
Mhm.
probably part of the reason why maybe I'm so into politics.
Mhm.
Today, I would read Legend by Mary Lou, um, Fahrenheit, Fahrenheit for 451. Sorry,
Mhm.
um, what's it called? I think it's either Pretties or Uglies. I know it became like a movie on Netflix or something, but I read the book The
Mhm.
Giver. These are all books that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
read
yeah. And
uh,
The
in
Giver, I know
school.
well.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's the last pillar. New York City charter schools, and then I guess the very last part of that is there's a New York mentality that you go up in. I think, and it's only exclusive to New Yorkers. The sense that you need to make it and you need to work hard,
Mm.
and nothing's given to you. And if you don't work hard enough, or if you let yourself go, then the consequences are very real. Especially if there's no safety net.
Mm.
If you have that, like what my family views as like an immigrant family of like, no matter what you do not become a burden on the system, on New York or the country. And you have to become a
Oh, that's
productive
interesting.
American citizen. If you have that attitude, then New York becomes like a very, for lack of a better term, do or die place. And
Yeah.
uh, I've just done, for
Yeah. Yeah.
my entire life, from charter school to getting into Brooklyn Tech
Yep.
and the political commentary work I do now. So
Mhm.
that's pretty
Can I ask
much
you I want to ask this question of
my
you,
background.
Daniel, but I want to ask you
Mhm.
both. Have you guys read Rob Henderson's book, Troubled, or do you know Rob
Mhm.
Henderson's sort of who talks about luxury beliefs?
Yes.
Um, because
Yes.
he first of all, it's a great book. I'll link that in our show notes too, because it's just he's a great guy and it's a fantastic read. But he talks about the thing that you were just saying, Daniel, about like when you're at Brooklyn Tech and you're with these Park Slope. And for folks who don't know, Brooklyn Tech is at one of the specialized high schools in New York City that you have to test into. So you know that all the kids that are there because they took a test and did well enough on it to gain admission. And then Daniel, you're referencing Park Slope, and for those who know, it's sort of a wealthy, liberal, lefty, woke place, right? And you did not grow up in the Brooklyn of the woke liberal left. And I just wonder, and what I always find so interesting, if you're a black man, a young black man, a teenager going through, as you started to rebel against woke originally, the classic super wokester, like a white girl, a well-off privileged white girl from Park Slope, her whole worldview is about helping people like you. Like she thinks her political idea is like, how do we help the oppressed black people of the city and the country? And so when you rejected sort of that ideology, when you wrote that first piece that was so, that in the Free Press and then that went into the New York Post, like I just wondered how your classmates dealt with that because their whole worldview, if you ask the Park Slope rich liberal girl, she's not trying to make the world a better place for herself. She's trying to make it a better place for you. So how did they take it when you were like, no, thank you?
Well, a lot of them didn't take it well. That's a great question, and you give a scenario, and that scenario is actually true, right? Like it actually happened. I actually had lunch with a friend from high school the other day before returning to Syracuse for the semester, and we were reminiscing on our time in high school, and he was telling me about a story. This was after I wrote the piece, and he was
Hmm.
telling me, I won't mention this girl's name, but she's from Park Slope. She's literally from Park Slope, and uh, he was telling me about how I wasn't in this like scenario. She was telling him about how I was racist for writing the
Right,
article and
right.
talking about how Brooklyn Tech is actually not segregated, a tool of segregation, and that merit-based schools should stay, and et cetera. So I talk about my background, my upbringing,
Mhm.
and she called me racist for that to my friend, and my friend was sitting there confused. And
Yeah.
for reference, I think he's Eastern European, and
Hmm.
so again, that immigrant mentality.
Mhm.
He was sitting there and thinking, "Wait, how is Daniel
Hmm.
the white girl from Park Slope is
The
telling
white Park Slope
me
girl, right?
that the black kid from
Calling
Bedford Stuyvesant is racist for not wanting to subscribe to her worldview."
It's so
And
insane, but also just like so anyone who's lived through that, like I think we're past peak woke. I don't know if you guys think we're past peak woke. I hope we are, but there is still it's such a long tail. And especially because all that woke ideology is embedded in our institutions
Hmm.
that like there's that same conversation is happening in lots of other places, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes online you see like white people screaming at black people who like don't get it about Donald Trump or who don't know, who aren't understanding their own oppression well
Hmm.
enough.
Right.
And so I'm sorry that like it's insane that that was your reception in some quarters, but I'm not at all
Not
surprised.
a,
well,
not
it wasn't
surprised.
all negative actually.
Oh, I'm sure
I
not.
want to
Yeah.
talk at you. So you mentioned in your story about the community of the canceled,
Hmm.
and another part of that is if you find the courage to step up and speak your mind, you will find that there's a lot of people who kind of agree with you,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they're really appreciative of you because you stood up and you said what is not only on your mind but their mind as well. And
Hmm.
Right.
so many times during my senior year of high school, because that piece came out literally 2 days before like the start of my senior year,
Hmm.
uh,
Oh my God.
and
Brave of you.
there were like guys, girls, like
Right.
who would like come up to me like in hallways after school, like give me a fist pump and say, "Hey, like I really like that piece. Like
Hmm.
you're spitting facts, man. Like
Yeah. Right.
keep it up." Um, I remember a conversation I had with one of my friends, uh, a really good acquaintance. I would call him a really good acquaintance. So like we will always like exchange pleasantries and
Hmm.
whatnot at school, and I remember him, he told me, hey, like, read your piece. Like I like to view myself as a libertarian, and I don't mind all the people who are sort of giving you flack for
Mhm.
believing what you want to believe in. So, like you said, Maud, there's not only a community of the canceled, which are like-minded,
Mhm.
ambitious, and you know, uh, they and
No, there's a
unrelenting sort
community
of
of the
people, but there's
courageous too,
yeah,
right? Like
community
you
of the
don't have to
courageous, and then
live
there's
through
like
a cancellation to be courageous enough to say, I'm not going along with the groupthink and the mindthink that's going on.
Mhm.
yeah,
I
and
think
then
you
there's
have to
just a
be
silent
courageous, but it
majority
is a little
too.
bit.
There's a silent majority too who, again, like you know, you don't want to call them like, oh, you're not courageous enough to step out and speak your mind. Many of them just want to, they just want to go through life without
Not
having
everyone
to
wants to
deal
be a
with
cultural warrior, but you
exactly.
have
And
to, but you get to the point where once you live in a society where offering one opinion versus the other, you know there's a repercussion. And I think a lot of students, and I saw it with my own kids going through the schools, you know that there's certain opinions you can have that it will be safe. And even if everyone doesn't agree with you, everyone will nod along. Trans women are women, or, America is a systemically racist country, or these things, these super woke, this pablum that people started spewing out is safe to say. To take issue with any of those things is not safe. And some people just don't want to be cultural warriors. So they're like, I don't agree with it, but
Mhm.
I don't, I want to be an engineer, or I want to
yes,
work in the
yeah.
arts, or I don't want to fight these fights. I want to do, I want to live a life. And it's certainly reasonable, but so, some of us have to fight the fight so that we can hold on to a country where where you're allowed to disagree,
Mhm.
or you're allowed to do the things that Ben has done.
Well, the thing is that with you too, I mean, people are so desperate for like your article took off. Like I'm a what did you say, a black man, high school student who refuses to go woke or something like that. Was that what it
Yeah,
was?
I'm 17 and I'm immunized for more politics is the
Okay.
title. So like
Immunized.
the
And so,
whole
but your picture was
yeah,
probably there, so people could probably see too that you were a black man, correct?
yeah.
Okay. So people are desperate for that because everybody knows
Right.
intrinsically, people who aren't stupid, that that approach to marrying political views to race and identity is fundamentally racist, and it perpetuates racism, and it's super regressive, where it gives the idea that like all black people think one way and all white people think one way and all Asian people think one way, when there's a diversity of perspectives within that, and everybody knows that. That's what we grew up. Anybody over whatever age or anybody that was raised right knows that you know, everybody thinks differently. We're all individuals. You judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And so when people read these things, it was like, yeah, it's so obvious, but it's also just people are so desperate for it because it's like they're
Mhm.
looking around them. And one, they're seeing how crazy different approaches to so-called anti-racism or improving racial equality are. But then also they are not allowed to say anything about it, or for a long time they really weren't, and still in many
Mhm.
cases aren't. They're terrified to say like this seems retarded, like this is completely backwards and this doesn't make any sense at all, but there's so many consequences for voicing your opinion about that. So people are just hungry for it. They're hungry for people saying what they know to be true and know to be true. First of all, Maud, shout out to Amy Chua, because I actually just met her yesterday.
Oh yeah,
Awesome. Love
amazing.
her. She's amazing. And for people who don't know her story, because I was familiar with her, but she's a professor. She works at Yale Law School. Her husband does as well. And they were definitely the subjects of a major cancellation campaign back in maybe like 2018, somewhere around there. And that was when I learned about her. I think I was still at Columbia at the time.
Mhm.
But I got even more information and about that saga, and it was fascinating. She's someone that I
Mhm.
could talk to for a million years, so
Mhm.
she's great. So shout out to her. Daniel, you said that you find that religious people or people that like have more of a glow about them, or they seem just happier than people that are more adrift and that they don't have that perspective. I appreciate that, and I think there's definitely validity to that, but I think that I have to disagree in the sense that one thing that I understand or have known, coming from a really religious background myself, but kind of falling out of that, is kind of missing how it felt to feel so certain about something. So, for example, I think that a lot of that glow or that ease or that happiness, not all of it, listeners are going to be like, oh my God, not all of it, but some of it has to do with the pressure is off of figuring out like what the meaning of life is, where you're going to go after you die, what you need to do. Like there is a great comfort in thinking or believing fundamentally like yes, there is a heaven. Yes, these are the things that I can do and cannot do or should and should not do. Yes, this forgiveness is available to me, mercy and forgiveness from this benevolent God through Jesus, and I that's the way, the truth and the light. I'm great. I'm good. I'm blessed as long as I keep this in my life, etc., right? And especially for Christians, I think. And
Oh man, I have
so
so many questions to ask you about this in it, but can you, for folks who don't know you, give a little bit more
yeah, I will.
background of
I
your religious?
totally I will, but I want to finish my thought because I want to say like there's a great comfort in that. And so for a lot of people that are young and that are adrift, they don't know how to think for themselves or how to be free thinkers and how to voice they're adrift in not knowing what's right and what's wrong. But you get to a point where you start to think for yourself, and it takes great courage, it takes a lot of work, but just a lot of hard work walking through fire and just like really kind of being like, okay, I have to not be afraid to kind of go down those dark paths in my mind to kind of figure out what I actually think about these things. And so I think
Well,
that there
I
are people that do have or can have a glow or that can have a really kind of stable sense of self and that aren't adrift, but they are the people that are really taught from a very, very young age how to think for themselves, how to advocate for themselves, how to be free thinkers, how to say what they actually think, and not be afraid to disagree with other people and have people disagree with them.
I certainly agree with you that those like the people who have like who I'm around surrounded with who have has have that glow in their life. They're not exclusively religious or
Right.
exclusively Christian. So I agree with you on that. I think that it's a bit idealistic to and now we're living through the consequences of idealistic to assume that most young people will end up uh it's a bit let me frame this. It's a bit it's a bit idealistic to tell young people that um they need to flesh an entire worldview out that will actually end up becoming productive for them at such a young age. And that's why we see so many young people who are adrift. And not only that, not only say that, okay, you're going to construct this worldview from the ground up yourself, but also I'm actually going to teach you and indoctrinate you with a worldview that has negative feedback loops when it comes to the pillars of oppressionomics and victimhood ideology,
Wait, Daniel, so that I
and
understand what you're saying, Daniel, are you saying that like not give that religion gives you the pillars in the worldview and that expecting kids to figure it out all on themselves without the religion is naive?
well, at least it gives them a starting framework, right? Like I have friends who are my age who aren't religious. They grew up Christian. They aren't practicing, or they don't view themselves as Christian. But you can tell that their worldview that they've come up with wasn't built on the ground up. If it's come from background experiences like growing up and going to church, even though they don't do so now as full on adults. But at least, but I think on the whole, as a country, um, and as a generation, it would I think Gen Z would have been better served if like you don't need to be religious as an adult, but like having the worldview you end up having uh lies more closer to that to a
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
tradition than the simplistic and overtly false idea that disparities mean discrimination,
Right.
and by virtue of existing, uh, if you have certain characteristics, you're an evil person, right? That's
Right.
like indirect. That's in direct contradiction of like the Christian worldview of everyone's made in the image of God
Right.
and everyone deserves dignity and respect.
But what it sounded like is that you're saying too that having a sense of belief or like a strong sense of belief too kind of not immunizes but protects younger people too from being so vulnerable to the indoctrination, like kind of lack of woke indoctrination or political indoctrination or indoctrination that goes on in liberal education, especially in universities and so on, where there's like more of a, well, I kind of know what I believe and there's all these different ideas, but this doesn't really, this contradicts with what I believe, and I have a stronger sense of like what I actually know. But
Exactly.
pushing
Yeah.
back against that is that,
Mhm.
there that that's a failure of education more than it and quality teaching and pedagogy than it is a success of teaching religion, because you're talking about like indoctrination and teaching people how to think and what to believe, but religion is that essentially. Not that it's bad, but it is indoctrination. You are told from a very young age, this is what the earth is, this is how old it is, this is how it was created, this is what happens to you when you die. All of these things that nobody knows. Well, I mean, we know actually about that it wasn't created about 6,000 years ago, that it was actually, but anyway, we don't know what happens after you die. So there is a lot that goes on, but that's just a failure of education because, young people who are kind of really vulnerable to this indoctrination stuff, like because there is indoctrination going on in these universities and these institutions, that's the problem. It should be just classic liberal educations, in a perfect world where people are taught to debate and taught to think differently and given different perspectives. And when they're taught different subjects, they're like, and by the way, guys, there's this whole school of thought over here that completely disagrees with what we're saying right now. And they actually say the opposite. And where people are forced to kind of contend with all these really difficult ideas. Certainly, it's not going to be realistic at all to think that young people, especially people in high school or people going into college or even through college, are going to know exactly what they think, but they're going to know how to think and they're going to know how to disagree with each other and how to brave having an entire room of people disagree with them, not going along with the herd mentality and understand and feeling okay and somehow peaceful or relatively peaceful within that gray area of not knowing all the answers to everything. That is asking a lot of young people, but I think it's possible, and I think that there is a lot of absolute, benefits of raising people religious, and I do not object to it at all. But I think that it also speaks to just a complete failure of the way that our education system has developed, especially in higher education.
I don't think I just gotta say that, Ben, I want you to talk about your background a little
Yeah,
bit
okay.
more.
Yeah.
Daniel and I did, but I don't think the two things that you're talking about are actually in contradiction with each
Hmm.
other in a way. And I don't think it's religion versus excellent education that teaches kids to think for themselves. I think because weirdly enough, I think you see, and Daniel's kind of living proof of it, sometimes kids who have a religious upbringing are the ones you're saying, oh, they're being indoctrinated like the Judeo-Christian values, but like those are often the kids who have been in our woke era, the ones who are most able to push back on the political
Hmm.
indoctrination. And it's the kids who have a certain moral core of teaching, and it can be because you're Jewish or you're Christian or your parents are missionaries or you just go to church once a week or whatever it is. But I think in full disclosure, because you have some serious churchiness in your background, Ben, you should tell
Yeah.
people
And
about
and
your
yeah, I mean
and you have a book coming out that talks about this because your book is definitely
about
talks
that.
about
Yeah.
your life.
Well, yeah,
Shameless
I mean,
plug.
and I right, but yeah,
This white gay.
I grew up in a Catholic charismatic renewal community. For people that aren't familiar with that, it kind of rose out of the late 60s. It kind of was this blend of Pentecostalism and Catholicism, where it was like there were charismatics speaking in tongues, prophecies, praying over people, that kind of thing, which was very kind of like foreign to the Catholic Church, which was very like rigid. And then all of these people, a lot of them were kind of like former hippies that had, kind of gotten high on Jesus. They were coming out of the drug haze of the 60s and then the early 70s, and they really wanted some kind of solution, and they found this. And so anyway, a part of that was there were things called covenant communities where people started forming these covenant communities. I think it started like maybe in Michigan. There were some in Michigan and so forth. And then
Wait, what is it called?
a
Covening?
covenant community. And
Oh,
that's what
covenant
I grew
community.
up in. So
Okay.
Amy Coney Barrett is our one of our social justice, Supreme Court justices, is a member of the People of Praise, and that is a covenant community. The women, the are handmaids. The males are the leaders. There are, there are. It's a community of people. They believe the same thing. That's very, not necessarily, people don't like live on a commune, but a lot of times they live in the same exact area in the same
Mhm.
neighborhoods. They raise their kids together. They send their kids to the same, oftentimes it's the private school that the covenant
Mhm.
community has built. That's how it was in my experience. So my
Mhm.
covenant community was called the Lamb of God. It was outside of Baltimore. It was in Maryland, and that's what I was raised in and grew up in. And first of all, to preface this too, I used to have coming out of that for a long time, being a gay man, leaving that community, I had a lot of resentment against religion. I had a lot of hangups about it, but I, I did the work. And so now I can go to church. I enjoy it. I like talking about religion. I like hearing it. I think that there is comfort in it. I like kind of, thinking about those ideas. There's a comfort to thinking about specific religious ideas. I can gather that and summon that. Whereas before it was like it's just kind of re-traumatizing for lack of
Right.
a better word. But anyway, I grew up in that. My father was one of the five leaders of that community. My mother was a prospective handmaid. She was actually turned down for the role. There were three handmaids that were the head handmaids of the community, and she was actually rejected from the role, which is super, super difficult for her to deal with because it kind of led her to believe that she like wasn't the perfect Christian that she thought she was. But they got into it really young in their early 20s, and it was first kind of started as this community of like, passion and love and joy and mercy and grace, like just praise the Lord and you're welcome here and everybody's welcome and forgiveness is available to you. And my mom, having grown up Catholic and going to Catholic school and just raised with that really harsh Catholic guilt, she wanted religion, but she couldn't stand the church with all the authoritarianism and the rigidity to it. So when she found this group of young people who were like her and who were so welcoming, she was like, "This is amazing." But what happened is that the leadership of that community got hooked up with these covenant community leaders and kind of learned how to establish that same lifestyle and that same community in the Lamb of God. So suddenly they had prophecies where, oh, God has called on us to all move to this area, to live in the same area, which was Catonsville outside of Baltimore. Everybody will settle in the same area. We'll all send our kids to the same school. And it just became super, super top heavy. It was kind of like a, Soviet, I mean, everybody knew, all the leadership knew the all of people's darkest secrets. They kind of passed up to the leadership, so the leadership kind of knew everything that was going on inside the homes of all the individuals in their community. It was just very overreaching. They had rules that they would require others to abide by, but then people would learn that they really weren't abiding by those rules themselves. So it became, and then there was a lot
Human
of,
nature.
yeah, and there was a lot of drama about money because tithes everybody had to pay 10%. I think it was 10% of their income tithes every year or perhaps every month. So there was a lot of drama about that, but the community ended up being investigated by the Catholic Archdiocese because it was claiming to be, a Catholic community, but
Mhm.
Catholics were saying these people are cult leaders. They're
Right.
actually teaching things that do not coincide. They're, drawing people away. It's very cult-like, and so there was this big investigation. And for people who, well, you read my book because I do write a lot about it. Cis
Yeah.
White Gay, it comes out November 4th. But that was one of the things that formed me and where I got comfortable with because after leaving that community when I was young, my mom decided to leave it. My dad was like, okay, whatever. Then they ended up divorcing And when I went through a hard time, I was gay. I went to public school, very bullied for my gender nonconformity. I was a really, really girly kid, so I eventually d developed a form of OCD called scrupulosity. So I became it was OCD is about like control, or feeling like you have wanting to have control over something that you have no control over. So whether it's compulsive hand washing, you think that you're warding off evil, or you're gonna save someone's life who you're worried about if you wash your hands 50 times a day. For me, it was prayer and ritualistic stuff because I was constantly self-scanning for signs of immorality. So it was like I became obsessed with everything that I was, doing, whether it was right or wrong. It was the littlest thing. I had a bad thought about, a negative thought about someone's outfit, and oh my God, God forgive me, like I'm so sorry. So it was all consuming, and so drugs, especially marijuana, when I started smoking that in around when I was 16, that actually was the first thing that kind of really helped me. It was a self-medication, but then eventually I got into other drugs, and it ended up becoming very bad. I mean, I was smoking pot every single day, and I became very delusional, in fact. And so after I graduated high school, I just went off the deep end. I got sober, clean and sober in my early 20s. That was the trajectory that led me to where I am today. So I was a hairstylist for a long time, but I always wanted to go back to school. And then I got married to my husband in 2014, and after that, I was like, I really, really do want to go back and finish my degree. I feel like I have more to offer. I want to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist. Like there were things that I wanted to do that really got derailed by my drug use and mental illness issues in my late teens and early 20s. And so, I went for it. I went back to community college for a year and in Maryland, and then found out about the School of General Studies at Columbia, which is one of their undergraduate schools that has not for non-traditional students. So it actually was basically started for, or really was more focused on mill vets, people who, especially GIs, like after World War II, people whose education had been completely interrupted.
Mhm.
And they were like, okay, let's create this program so that these GIs can actually get this education. Maybe they're 23, 24, 25, 27, but they can actually
Mhm.
get an education now. And then, of course, it opened up to other people. So there's a lot of different folks. There's still a lot of mill vets in there. There's like, professional ballerinas. So there's just a lot of different people with very, very diverse backgrounds. And it's a really great, great program. And the best thing about it is that everybody's matriculated into the rest of the school with the other undergraduates. So you're just getting this really, really quality Ivy League education. You're not
Mhm.
kind of cordoned off,
Mhm.
it's not like a professional studies school. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's very rigorous and it's great. And I was like, wow,
Right.
this is awesome. So I found out about that. I got into that school, and I went to school, started there in 2017, graduated in May 2020. But how that links to that religious upbringing is because when I went there, I had thought that I had kind of dealt with all the scrupulosity stuff, the OCD, my hangups about religion, that I had come a really far way. Being in that in that space where everybody was crucified, or the purity policing, the constant, you're a you're the, and now suddenly I'm like the worst. I'm not just like bad, I'm like the reason why the world is bad, like I am the embodiment of it. And my gayness,
Yeah.
again, that's why I call my book Cis White
Right.
Gay, because that did nothing. In fact, it was almost like worse, like, oh, you're a horrible cis white gay, because somehow being white and cis, meaning that was a male who still identified as a male, that I was somehow like a traitor to the project, the queer project of like disabling the gender binary, and therefore I was transphobic, and therefore I'm racist. Like it was just like I was pushing against the larger project, and this is not an exaggeration, the larger project of kind of raising the West, destroying capitalism in the West, and kind of building a socialist utopia. Who knows what it will look like? But that is really what that
Right.
project is, and what it's all part and parcel from, regardless of whether or not these young people know that they're a part of that. Many of
Right.
them do, but a lot of them don't. And that's really what
Or
the
don't know what
project
it
is.
entails.
Right, right. So being in that atmosphere, what happened? Well, I was all raring to go. I was like, I'm going to be with my people. I was like, I'm a progressive. I'm social justice. Like I was like protesting against the Muslim ban, and like, participating in like the anyway, A lot of stuff. I
Yeah,
interned at GLAD. I was just like, just on
right.
fire. This was my new
Mhm.
religious calling in a
Right.
sense. And it
And
gave me
thinking
a
of yourself as a progressive lefty,
yes, and
like,
it gave me a great sense what a lot in a lot of ways, which I see this, I think, in a lot of other people, is that it replaced that longing that I felt to feel a part of something righteous and good. So when I found social justice and I first did like marriage equality and then transgender rights, I found that this was satisfying something in me that made me feel, oh, I'm a good person again. Like I'm on the right side. I
mhm,
have a people, and it was very comforting.
mhm,
And so I was just there were so many things, of course, within civil rights or within social justice that I do believe in that I agree with,
mhm,
but then otherwise there was so much that I was just parroting. There was so much, it was just a
right.
romanticized vision of Columbia, of social justice, of civil rights, of protesting, of all of those things,
Mhm,
when there wasn't, I could not dissect or pull apart any kind of reason why people would disagree with certain tenets of it.
mhm,
And I couldn't really defend on why my way was the right way. It was just that it was the moral way and it was the just
mhm,
way. So speeding up here, once I started dissenting and start very quickly, within my first semester, second semester, and started seeing like these people are awful. They're the worst people on the planet. They are crazy. These
You
ideas
just
are,
self-corrected there. You were going to say something else before you said awful, but
yeah.
I think you were going to.
These people are crazy. They're just these ideas are nonsensical.
Hmm.
This is not pragmatic. This is actually fundamentally racist. This is actually fundamentally sexist. There is
Hmm.
nothing liberating about this ideology or this ideology, et cetera,
Hmm.
et cetera.
Hmm.
And uh, I felt consumed with guilt, with fear of being a bad person, not just being called out, which I was called out by other people
Yeah.
whenever I, misspoke or they thought I misspoke. Because the thing was, the most trippy part about it was I would say something that was kind of fundamentally liberal or progressive, but they would expect to come out of my body the exact opposite. So
Hmm.
it's like they would hear the exact opposite of what I
Hmm.
said and then
Hmm.
call me out in front of the classroom. And then it would be like, wait,
What's
what?
an example, Ben? Can you give me an example?
I said something like, we were talking, yeah, this is actually in my book, but I took Hamid Dabashi's Contemporary Islamic Civilization. He's a very controversial Iranian professor at that school. It was my first semester, and we were in discussion section, and we're talking about gender nonconformity in the Muslim world. And someone had brought up the fact that, there is more, well, the penalties are more severe in terms of criminality, but also effeminate men are kind of more policed by Iran's morality police or in general than more masculine women,
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm.
And that is it's not by any means easy but it's actually they're more policed there.
Hmm.
And I said, well, that's because in all societies there's sexism, but
Hmm.
people, especially in like let's say in a Islamic theocracy, they think that men by being effeminate or feminine, they're actually degrading themselves by lowering themselves to the status of women. So
Right.
for women, it's actually easier that they can be gender nonconforming because they are kind of lifting themselves up above or at least
Sure.
attempting to.
Right.
They're
Right.
not they know nobody thinks they can, and all men know like, well, you're never going to be a man and you're never going to be
Right.
as good as a man, but at least you're not
You're
trying to
trying
degrade yourself by
by being
lowering
super
yourself to
feminine.
yes. And
Right.
so
Interesting.
a young woman said, there is nothing easier about being a woman in this
Right.
society. So I'm saying this kind of fundamentally feminist, kind of
Yeah.
anti-sexist opinion,
Right.
which is, and it's the truth, because I know what the fuck I'm talking
Right.
about.
Yeah.
And then it was just like very shocking because it was in front
Yeah.
of this class. It was my first semester,
Yeah.
and it was by a woman, and I always had been really close with like
Yeah.
all my closest friends were always women.
Right.
And I was raised by my, primarily by my mom and my two older sisters. So I just, it was very, very disorienting.
Right.
And that continued to happen where it was like people would just not just contend like, oh, I misunderstand. I think you might be wrong about that. It was like what I was saying was actually
That your feminist
sexist
lens on
or
gender
racist or whatever.
nonconformity, yeah,
Yes.
was wrong
Right.
because you got it wrong.
So
You're
it
bringing traditional
exacerbated
liberalism in.
And so it exacerbated that scrupulosity.
Right.
So suddenly, all of these old things that came up that erupted after I left that religious community
Mhm.
all came up again. And I saw all these parallels between this cult and the cult that I grew up in. And I'm like, this is the same shit. And these
Yeah.
people are actually worse
The
because
cult
there's
of the
no
covenant
mercy
versus the
and there's
cult of the
no
woke.
grace, there's
Yep.
no salvation, that there's nothing you can do
Right.
to adequately repent or apologize or redeem yourself. Nothing. You
Oh,
will
that's so
apologize
interesting
for the
then.
rest of your life.
Right.
You will try to do the work for the rest of your life
Oh,
until you die.
Ben,
Ben,
that's
if a
so,
few
so
points you
interesting.
make, Ben, a few points you make that I like Maud said is very interesting. First things first, I'm people who are smarter than us probably have the answer, but I wonder how, the difference between like being a Catholic and then being Protestant slash Baptist, my like that's how I was raised, factors into your experience and my experience, where in baptism, right, there aren't church sacraments where you like go to confession, for example,
Mhm.
right? It's like it's between you and God. And then I guess with my upbringing, another difference is that my my the way I was growing up was constantly being like there was constant tension between New York City, the culturally enriching New York City, and my religious slash cultural upbringing. And so there was always tension between, or like a back and forth between the way I grew up and the way my Muslim friends grew up, for example. And maybe so that was one thing I was thinking about as you were telling your story. And the second thing, I mean, the way you ended it off, I mean, it's so perfect. And that's the reason why, even though like at least among my peer group, those who have experienced some form of religion in their life, it's not exclusively people who are religious who have that glow, but literally anybody else who everyone who does not subscribe to a worldview that, again, like you said, has no salvation. Um, it deems people of certain characteristics, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, you can even say the right things, you're evil, and there's nothing you can do about it. Uh, and I just you put it so gracefully there. So
I,
that's great story.
I, it's such a great story, and I literally can't wait to read your book, Ben. But I like just to what you said at the very end. I find so interesting, and it relates to all of our stories about there being no grace and no forgiveness in the woke cult, right? Because there were people who were like friends of mine who were women my age, like our kids were in the same nursery schools, like women who did, and some of the, for some people, my first transgression of like defending meritocracy in public schools was enough to like write me off as it. But some people were like, "Oh, we actually agree with you about." They wanted their kids in these good schools, and but then when I transgressed about COVID, that was too much. Oh, Maud won't wear a mask, and Maud did it. And then for some people that were like, "We're with you on COVID," when I like transgressed about gender stuff, and I wouldn't say that like these kids tr are true trans and they need to, then that was too much. They were like, Maud, we went with you so far, but that's too much. Like, we can't go with you there. But like, especially because maybe because I ran for office and it's different if you don't run for office, but like, there are people who like, I feel like people who think they're good people in that woke cult who really are like, they're marching around with their keffiyehs and their Free Palestine flags right now, and they think they're these super moral people. They would like to see the people who disagree with them like disappeared, right? Like, like an Argentine junta, like, just disappear them in the middle of the night, right? Like they'd like to see my whole career die, to see me never be employed again, to see me like there's a viciousness to that woke cult, and I've seen it in sometimes the smaller the stakes, the more vicious people
Mhm.
are, and what's really missing from it is the concept of grace or forgiveness or, true inclusivity or true community. Um, and sometimes, and now that like I've survived a lot of that and that I do have this community, I can look back at sometimes, but sometimes I just marvel at how I don't know how vicious people are, right? Like there's lots of people I
How vicious
totally
people can be
how
in
they can be.
the absence of humility, to understand that, you're not better than, or you're not more moral than evildoers, and quite frankly just consequential people in history, right? Like
Mhm.
and at least in school, like you're taught as a young person, well, you're going to be the difference, and you're taught history in this lens of like, oh, those evil, and then fill the
Mhm.
placeholder, whether we're
Mhm.
talking about World
Mhm.
War II or slavery in the United States or
Mhm.
Christopher Columbus.
Mhm.
These are consequential, especially when it comes to like consequential figures like Christopher Columbus, actually.
Mhm.
Um, where he's done unspeakably evil things. Yes, the reason why we talk about him, uh, and are some accounts of him, uh, do some accounts of him do not talk about his evil act and
Mhm.
exclusively talk of him as a hero. Yes, but um ideally we should be talking about Christopher Columbus. I don't know why I'm using Christopher Columbus as an
Yeah.
example, but he just happened to be in my mind. He's a consequential figure. That's why we talk about it, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but the way we sort of like growing up like in high school and whatnot, the way we would have like Socratic seminars about consequential figures like him, like it's as if we're doing the judging, right? As if we're the
Mhm.
judges, like we're like in the seat of God almost. And we can
Mhm.
say, well, he did that evil thing and that evil thing and that evil thing. And
Wait, Daniel, say what you
the
mean more
implicit
about
thing with
humility. Say what you mean more about humility, because I think that's really interesting. What are you saying about the lack of humility?
yeah, I was gonna say like implicitly by making those judgments, you're lacking the humility to say, well, I am fallible to the same hate and the same evil actions because we're that consequential figure or that person who
Hmm.
I'm trying to cancel, who I'm dehumanizing by calling them a
Hmm.
Nazi or a
Hmm.
fascist or whatever. They need oxygen to survive just like me. They're human just like me.
Well,
There's not
that's
enough humility.
I'm so glad you said that because that is what I've noticed and what you see in these communities, like in at Columbia or wherever. They actually kind of have a very fundamental misunderstanding about like human nature, or at least a kind of mythological strange. It's very kind of Rousseauian, where like, oh, society corrupted humans, or no, like man is in it, innately corrupt and whatever. And it's kind of that Rousseauian view of like of the quote unquote noble savage,
No,
like
yeah.
the
Yeah.
untouched, is just, and we can kind of return to that by decolonizing not just our lands, but our minds, our thoughts, education, everything is an effort to purify ourselves of what we've been tainted with, which is civilization, which
Right.
is the enlightenment, which is how where we've come to understand ourselves and what we know, that this we need to erase it, we need to kind of erase and reboot,
Yeah.
and that will bring us back
Well,
to
just
our,
erase, not reboot.
well, not reboot,
Because
yeah, or
they don't
overwrite.
articulate any of
They
they
don't,
don't
you're right, they
articulate
don't
any
articulate
vision.
anything. But that's the thing,
Yeah.
is like when we're talking about like, oh, he's a horrible person, these horrible people, or this is horrible, and it's like that's what human nature from the beginning of the time. We have been warring tribes, we've been warring, like it is we're animals, we fight to survive. We are actually so lucky now because we're living in a time where we're not all tearing each other apart to get food and to get mates and stuff. Like we have a system that protects us from ourselves. We're law abiding, we have government, we have
Mhm.
ideas, we have philosophy, we have religion, we have
Mhm.
whatever that instructs us what to do. And that's fundamentally missing because the approach to education, indoctrination,
Mhm.
is decolonization, which is erasing,
Mhm. Tearing
right?
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. A lot of when we're talking about New York City, because at the end of the day, this is a New York City podcast. Um, when it comes to New York City specifically, New York is what happens when you allow underneath Enlightenment principles, freedom of association, freedom to have property and own your own labor, freedom of expression, et cetera, these Enlightenment principles. Within that framework, that classical liberal framework, you have a multicultural metropolis like New York City. But what we see in academic circles, that concepts of like private property is like a white man's concept, all right? Like concepts of freedom of association, all these, because they were written descriptively, right? Just descriptively written by white men and underneath a certain worldview, anything that is done that having to be done by a certain demographic is evil and automatically illegitimate. You're destroying the framework in which like places like New York City is allowed to exist,
Yep.
are able to thrive, right? And so, and I that whole philosophy, that whole worldview would be way more interesting if there was a proper articulation of different of the a different proposal of like how to know and property or property rights and et cetera, et cetera. But there isn't one. There's only a critique, right? Critical theory, right? We're going to critique this work no matter what, what field it may be, which I find incredibly frustrating and very easy
Hey,
to adopt, by the way.
gentlemen, I only caught the end of what Daniel was saying because I had to step away for a quick minute. But I'm going to say in the show notes, I'm not putting Rousseau. We're going to, even though that's where we wound up, it's not going in there. But
Yeah.
Daniel's piece is linked to some of Ben's writing is and everything else.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that that's where we wound up. We are going to need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
And I am very excited to see the list of links that we're going to have in these show notes because we covered a lot.
Yeah.
And I think anyone listening now has a little bit of a better idea of who we are.
But
And
yeah, and next time we want to get back into current events, and we want to just be able to have this
absolutely,
space to be a really candid space where we can have a conversation where it's almost like we're not really being listened to, because that's the idea. Like the third rail, we
absolutely.
want to be able to say things which, whatever, however problematic or however, third railish they are, like we want to be able to say them and to kind of just express ourselves, honestly and authentically.
And because it's such a danger to lose those spaces where people are forced to only say the party line.
Totally.
Great talking to both of you gentlemen again. And to all the folks who've tuned in and listened, it's so great to build yet another community.
Yeah, of course. And before we close out, make sure you guys follow us on our socials. We have Third Row Pod on Instagram. We have a X account now and also a TikTok, so you can find the podcast clips if you're unable to watch the entire podcast episode.
And definitely subscribe on Substack if you can. We have free subscriptions and then paid subscriptions opportunities as well for people that have the money and that can afford to help us to continue to do this. That would be amazing. And Daniel, good luck with your first week at school and getting
Indeed.
Oh,
settled in and
we'll
everything
need.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Good luck on the first week.
Yeah.
All right, all. See you
Have a good
soon.
week.
Bye.